Hi, everybody. Welcome to Special Education Thursday. I am Molly Whalen, and we do Special Education Thursdays on behalf of Advocates for Justice in Education, or AJE. They are the official parent training and for special education and disability rights. And we started Special Education Thursday to take a bite-sized piece out of sometimes a complex issue within special ed and try to make it a little bit more understandable for parents. I'm a longtime parent advocate. I have two children in DC that were born here and also have disabilities and have gone through special education systems. So we try to keep this very parent friendly. We've got a topic today that's really timely as kids are going back to school and parents are often in their workplace. Our topic is about knowing your rights in your workplace when you are a parent of a child with disability. And I'm thrilled to welcome our guest, Laura Brown, who is from the organization First Shift. And Laura, welcome. I'm going to ask you to just share with us and everybody listening what you do and why you do it here in DC.
Hi, well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be part of this webinar. And I will tell you that the mission of First Shift Justice Project is to help working mothers and working parents assert their workplace rights to avoid job loss. And so on a daily basis, we're providing the full range of legal services from just consultation to representation to help people go back into their workplaces and ask for what they need so that they can keep their jobs and take care of their families too. And the reason I got into this work is because I'm a parent myself. And I think that even after many years as an employment lawyer, I had no idea how difficult it would be once I had children to figure out how, even under the best circumstances, even with an employer, even with a family-friendly workplace, how I was going to continue to work and take care of my kids and my family at the same time.
Well, you know, this has really come into forefront a lot in the last, several. Sorry, I've got my screen froze there. In the last few years, because I think really there's been a lot of push me, pull me for parents in the workplace, and the amount of time it does take to, work with a school when you have a child with a disability. And so I'd love to just kind of start in the beginning, like, can a parent ask for time off? And under what reasons do they have a right to ask for time off? So let's just start there.
Okay. Well, first let me just start by saying that the law that applies to a person who's employed is dependent on where they're physically working. So if you work for a DC employer, the DC law is what applies. But if you're a DC resident and you work in Maryland or Virginia, the law that applies to you in your workplace is the law of Maryland or Virginia. So today I'm talking primarily about the rights of workers in DC. And in DC, you have the right to paid sick days, which you can use to care for your children. You may have the right to time off under the DC Family Medical Leave Act if your child has a serious health condition and if you meet the other eligibility requirements. And there's also something in DC called the Parental Leave Act, which is very little known and little exercised, but which is extremely useful and designed precisely to enable parents to attend their children's school events. And then finally, there's a law called the Universal Paid Leave Act, which is the most recent one, and it does not provide the right to job-protected leave. But if you're taking leave to care for your family members, including your children, it does allow you to apply for paid leave insurance benefits to the DC government. That law is not in effect yet in the sense that the benefits are not accessible to families, but in July 2020, they will be.
Can I ask a question about that? And we've got the slide on the screen. What exactly is paid leave insurance?
It's basically wage replacement. If I'm someone who has FMLA leave and maybe I have to take a week off to attend to my child for whatever reason, or a day off, and I exercise my right to job-protected leave under FMLA, that leave is still unpaid. And if I work in a workplace where I don't have any vacation available to me and I don't have any paid sick time, or maybe any more paid sick time, then I can go to a DC government office, the Office of Paid Family Leave, and submit a claim for my wages to be replaced for the day or days that I missed while I was attending to that need.
Huge benefit, because of course, and I want to stop and say FMLA, and I think I've got this right, is Family Medical Leave Act. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is something that I would imagine most, when you're working for employers, most HR people, human resource people that you would talk to in your employment office would know about. And I guess because the big issue is you can get time off to do this, but do you get paid time off? And so for a lot of parents, that's a big difference.
Correct. And you're right that human resources offices should know about family medical leave, but I am constantly surprised at the parents who contact us for assistance who are struggling to maintain employment, whose employers have not told them about their ability to access family medical leave to attend to a child who has a chronic health problem or a special need.
Okay, and that would require, so if you have a child who has an IEP in the school, that means that you can take advantage of this because that would be a special need, correct?
I have to say most likely. Lawyers give lots of qualified responses, and that's because there are lots of variables that affect eligibility. Okay. For example, under the Family Medical Leave Act, your child has to be qualified and have a serious health condition. Okay. And what that means is either that health condition, in order to treat it, involved hospitalization or it involved ongoing medical treatment. So if your child is receiving ongoing treatment for an issue, then they qualify, and you then would qualify if you meet the other eligibility requirements to take leave under the Family Medical Leave Act. So it's possible that some situations which, under which a kid might have an IEP may not qualify as a serious health condition.
So that's what I was going to ask. Would, say, let's take autism, that, and they're getting ongoing therapeutic treatment, ABA or OT or speech.
Yes.
That would qualify?
And I think that's most likely, yes, to qualify.
Okay. So
you have to have medical certification, right? So even if there's a possibility that you would qualify, your employer should provide you with the legally required notice and should request medical certification from the medical provider about the particular issue so that it can be verified that there is a serious health condition involved.
So probably would not qualify if your child has, say, a learning disability like dyslexia, and that's why they have an IEP. So
if it doesn't require continuing medical treatment, then it is not going to qualify as a serious health condition.
That's something good for parents to talk to maybe your organization about or do a little research on that. But there's certainly some avenues to explore for parents if they have a child with a disability or, a learning disability as well, because they might have, perhaps they have ADHD or they have some other health condition that they could be qualified under.
Right. But this is a perfect opportunity to talk about DC's Parental Leave Act.
Okay.
And what DC's Parental Leave Act provides is up to 24 hours per year of unpaid time that a parent can take off from work in order to attend to their child's school activities.
Okay.
And that is without regard to whether or not their child is disabled or has any kind of learning disability or anything at all. That time can be used to attend parent-teacher conferences. It can be used to attend IEP meetings. It can be used to attend, back-to-school night or sports events or school concerts or anything that involves your child in their school.
But it is not paid, so you can take.
It is not paid, but it is job protected.
Okay, great. So you can't be penalized for asking for that time off.
Correct. And now you have to follow your employer's normal procedures for requesting time off.
Okay, so that might be requesting it in advance or filling
out
a form or doing some kind of slip. Okay.
Right.
So let's talk about, you've got a great slide here about making sure that you're not, as a parent and an employee, you're not being discriminated against by your employer. So you've listed all of these pieces. You can't be discriminated against by your employer if you have caregiving responsibilities because of the expense of providing health insurance to a disabled child, because of the association with the disabled child, or because the employer believes that the parent will be distracted by the disabled child at work. So can you share a little bit more about these elements that are protected?
Sure. Both in D.C. and in Montgomery County, those jurisdictions, their human rights acts protect people with caregiving responsibilities from discrimination in employment. And caregiving responsibilities are really anyone who's a caregiver for someone, whether that person has a disability or not, is protected from being treated differently than other employees. And then here's an example. I once worked with a woman who needed to adjust her work schedule because she had to get to the aftercare program at her kid's school on time or she would be charged. Right. And her work schedule did not enable her to do that. Now, employers have full authority and discretion to establish what an employee's work schedule is. However, if they make adjustments for some employees and not others, right, and the others that they're not adjusting the work schedules for are in a protected class, then that's discrimination. And so what happened in her situation is her employer denied her request to adjust her schedule, but in the same frame of time, another employee went to their employer, the scheduler, and said, I have a regular weekly soccer game that I like to go to, and I really need to leave early on those days. Can I adjust my work schedule? And as you've already figured out, the answer to that employee was, why, sure, we'd be happy to adjust your work schedule. And there are, gender stereotypes and all kinds of, cultural issues attached to this, but the reality is that if that employer is telling the person who wants to go play soccer that they can have a schedule adjustment, but the woman who has to pick up her kid at aftercare cannot, then that is caregiver discrimination.
And let me ask you this, does this also come into play if you're interviewing for a job and you self-disclose that you have a child with a disability or a special health care need, that they can't not hire you only because of that?
Absolutely. However, the problem in hiring discrimination is often proof. And so, as a matter of course, when I'm advising people about, going through a hiring process, you should never tell your prospective employer in an interview before you've been hired anything about your personal life that may potentially bias them or compromise, their view of your application. The correct way to approach it would be to go through the interview and have that interview be based specifically on your, job qualifications. And then if you get the job at the beginning of your employment or, right before you start, after you've been given the job and accepted the offer, that's when you inform your employer of anything that may affect, if you think, gee, because I have this child with a disability, I may from time to time need time off or something like that, that would be the time to have that conversation. You shouldn't withhold that information from your employer, but your employer should not ask it in a hiring process, and you should not disclose it.
Okay, so that's not anything until after you've been offered the job and accepted. That's really good advice. I don't think I knew that even from back when I remember being almost kind of pregnant or almost,
right,
assuredly pregnant when I was doing one interview, but I wasn't sure.
Right.
Talk about what working parents should do. Like, what is some of your advice on how they can be proactive and, what should they do if they have a child of high needs or they're worried about caring for their child?
I think that communication is really a key. First, of course, knowing your rights when you go into a conversation with your employer is critical because you have to know, your employer may have some policies with respect to leave, but they have a lot of discretion to, make the rules on how they allow people to take leave. And again, it can't be discriminatory. They can't treat you differently because of your family responsibilities, but they have a lot of discretion to make up their own rules. But there are underlying basic legal rights that you have that they do not have the right to manipulate or, enforce selectively. And so knowing that before you go in and knowing kind of what the boundaries are of the law. For example, under FMLA, you have to have been there a year in order to qualify to take that leave. So if you've only been with your employer for 6 months of time and you go in and you say, I have a child with special needs and I need time off, you're not going to be covered by the Family Medical Leave Act.
Okay, so that's good. And then you've got, I'm on your slide too, and you said something that I think probably a lot of people fail to do, read the employee handbook.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just knowing what your employer is offering is a good idea, and knowing how their employment policies work and their leave policies, and being able to ask questions about it. And then, I think, we do a lot of pregnancy work. I mean, both in pregnancy and also in caregiving. I mean, sometimes caregiving is viewed as almost a shameful thing to bring up in a workplace. And if you don't bring it up and you need time off for various purposes related to your caregiving responsibilities and your employer doesn't know, then that's going to be a problem in terms of proving that they're treating you differently. Because they're going to say, I had no idea. And so it's important to be, as you said, proactive about communicating your needs to your employer when you have a clear legal right to, take the leave that you need. Following whatever their policies are regarding calling out to the extent that it's possible. I mean, obviously a lot of needs are unforeseeable, and when they're unforeseeable, you have to give as much notice as is practicable usually. And that means as much as possible, you have to give your boss notice. But the more that your boss has a perception that, you're taking leave off at random times and that you're therefore not dependable, the more difficulty you're going to have in exercising those rights.
You to also say, keep notice on how others are treated. I mean, do you give any advice on, should you be looking at the people in the same job description as you, or it doesn't matter? It could be anybody in the office or employees, or, how do you do that without being, I think that might feel kind of strange for some people.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't want to make anyone paranoid about their workplace, but, sometimes there's a lot of self-doubt associated with caregiving because we're kind of enculturated in this country to think that if you can't handle your family responsibilities and your job, then there's something wrong with you. And in fact, there's something terribly wrong with our system. And so people don't talk about this stuff, and they tend to look upon difficulties that they're having at work as their fault. And so what the problem is that if you don't pay attention to what's happening to other people who may be often given more leeway and latitude with respect to attendance issues and punctuality and taking time off and working from home and all those types of things, then you're not going to be aware that perhaps you are being treated differently than other employees. Mm-hmm. And so, that's why it's important to kind of keep track. And although one time that you're treated differently than another employee, and perhaps worse, may not make a legal case, 10 times might. Yeah. And then, and even one time it may be cause for you to go internally and complain to your employer or complain to a supervisor about what the pattern that you don't want to see unfold. Because you shouldn't wait until you have one foot out the door in order to do anything about this stuff. I mean, you really need to nip it in the bud if you feel like you're being treated differently in the most tactful, professional way possible.
And for those of you who've listened to these, our webinars and the podcast of Special Education Thursdays before, there's a common theme that we talk about for parents, as well as sometimes when we're talking about our students with disabilities, is about self-advocating, is asking
exactly.
And explaining, doing things in good faith, but you have to speak up. And I think your advice at the end of this one slide says, do not quit. And meaning, just don't walk away without at least trying to say, this is what I need. This is how this would be helpful so I can work at the job. But, I'm also a person who has personal responsibilities and family needs. So I think it's great to say, don't quit, speak up.
Well, so there's a number of reasons for that statement in there. First of all, the disclaimer is that I don't know, and I tell my clients I don't know your daily reality. And I don't know that, if you're losing, hours of sleep, waking up at 3 a.m. because you're stressed out about going to work, I don't know how this is affecting your mental health. or your physical health. And if you're having a real issue at work and you don't see any other way to maintain your mental health but to quit, then that is a decision only you can make. But what I can say as a lawyer is that you should assert your rights before you decide to quit, and then have them be denied, and then, figure out where you're going to go from there. But then the other issue is if you quit, your legal case is probably not a viable one to pursue, because you have made the choice to quit. And it's very difficult to prove that circumstances were so horrible in your workplace that you had no other choice other than to quit, particularly if you haven't made a diligent effort to, assert your rights before you leave. But, you're in a much better legal position, as horrible as it sounds, to push and try and assert your rights until the point that they fire you. And then you have a legal case that you can bring and say that you were terminated because you tried to assert your right to leave, or you were being discriminated against because of your caregiving responsibilities.
I see. So we love, we're almost at our time limit. And one of the things that we always love to ask our presenters and sharers, that I always find, like, as parents, sometimes we go to these big trainings and there's just so much. So we try to keep these really tight and give you a few next steps. Where would you suggest, other than your organization, and please, you can share that as well, but where else should parents get information? Or if you were going to give a piece or two of advice to someone who's a little concerned about what's going on in their workplace, what should they do next? What should they read? Where should they go?
That's a good question. I mean, of course, as you noted, our lawyers are on hand to help people negotiate and navigate themselves through these issues and engage in that self-advocacy. We do a lot of whispering in the ear, knowing that people are generally better off if they can keep a job rather than, litigating a case against their employer after they've already lost it. The other thing is that, the women that I work with get a lot of information from one another. And so, groups that you are connected with at the school, if you are attending events, school events, and there are parents in the class, or, all of us are forced to figure out how we're going to make our lives work with our kids. And so sometimes someone else may have figured out a solution to something that had not occurred to you, and it would be worthwhile for you to, and of course, if you are a union employee, you should be going back to your union and your union rep or your shop steward and talking through some of the issues you're experiencing with them, because they may be your best advocate. And the other thing I'd say is coworkers. If you are worried as a person, one person going into a supervisor's office to assert your rights, but there's 4 or 5 of you that are being marginalized because of caregiving responsibilities, and you all go in, your supervisor or boss is going to have a much harder time dismissing those issues.
That's great. So absolutely use the power of your colleagues and your fellow parents, and really speak up too. And so I've got your slide that has Laura's contact information. Her organization's First Shift Justice Project. Telephone number is 240-241-0897. That's 0897. And it's www.firstshift.org. And you're located at 1227 Good Hope Road, Southeast in Washington, D.C. So, Laura, thank you so much. This was really helpful. I was a little surprised I learned something myself. So it's really to know, and I think it really goes along with our theme of speak up, ask for help, and make sure that you know what your rights are. And we say that all the time in special education and when raising children with disabilities. So for everyone else, please make sure that you take a look at our AJE website and webinars, and you'll find our very large library of Special Education Thursday that has a very, very wide range of topics. And this recording will be posted on our website within about 24 hours. So thank you so much, Laura.
All right. Thank you.